How was the Bible written? The answer is stranger and more human than legends suggest. It wasn't dropped from the sky or penned by one author in one era. It grew slowly, voice by voice, across languages and empires. Follow the trail from campfire stories to royal scribes, from fragile scrolls to hand-copied books, and learn the choices that shaped the most read library on earth. Act 1. Setup. Picture the Bible as a city built over centuries. New streets cut through older lanes. Some houses keep original stones. Others were rebuilt after fires and wars. The Bible is like that, a library of many books, written, edited, and arranged from about the late 2nd millennium BCE into the 2nd century CE, then copied and translated for 2,000 years more. Start with language. Most of the Old Testament, or Hebrew Bible, was written in Biblical Hebrew, with a handful of chapters in Aramaic, the sister language people spoke across the Near East after the Babylonian exile. The New Testament was written in Koine Greek, the everyday trade language of the Eastern Roman Empire. Each language brought its own rhythm. Hebrew likes parallel lines and concrete images, mountains skipping like rams, seas roaring, hearts melting. Greek flows with clauses that stack like steps and turns precise with verbs and tense. Now the tools. Early writers used reed pens, carbon ink, and papyrus sheets made from pressed river plants. Animal skins turned into parchment for more durable scrolls. A scribe might stitch sheets end to end, roll the work around a wooden core, and wrap it in a linen band. To find a section, you didn't flip pages. You rolled carefully while memory guided your hands. Before ink, there was voice. Much of Israel's earliest material likely lived as spoken story, song, and legal formula. Think of the Song of Deborah in Judges, or Jacob's blessings in Genesis. Poetry with repeated patterns made truth easy to remember around a fire, in a field, or at a festival. When scribes wrote those lines, they preserved the rhythm of hearing. Parallel halves, refrains, and balanced images kept the sound of the community alive on the page. Who were the scribes? They were craftsmen of words-trained readers, counters, and editors. In royal courts and temple schools, they kept records, copied letters, and shaped archives. The Hebrew Bible often nods to them. Is it not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Israel? Is a refrain that hints at sources lost to us. Writing was costly. Parchment took skins, ink took time, and errors cost both. So scribes learned to work in teams, reading aloud while others followed with their copies, checking line lengths, counting letters, and marking margins. How did individual books begin? Different ways. Some read like first-hand testimony. Many psalms say, "of David," which can mean by, for, or in the style of David. Proverbs gathers sayings from royal schools. Prophetic books preserve speeches delivered in public squares, then arranged by disciples into scrolls. Legal collections grew as kings, priests, and elders issued rulings and recorded them with a header like, "These are the laws," a common ancient phrase. Genesis through Deuteronomy, the Torah, lies at the heart of the Hebrew Bible. Jewish and Christian tradition long ascribed the Torah to Moses. Many scholars today see a tapestry of sources woven over time: legal codes, ancestral stories, priestly records, and speeches shaped during and after the exile in Babylon. You can feel this layered craft when names shift or the same event appears from two angles. Whether you hold to Mosaic authorship or source theory, the process points to a mix of memory, law, and worship, collected, edited, and re-edited for public reading. Exile in the 6th century BC may be the most important phase in the Old Testament's writing. When Jerusalem fell, priests, prophets, and scribes carried words farther than they could carry bricks. In Babylon, they copied, taught, and prayed. Ezra, a scribe, later read the law to a crowd that wept to hear it again. The exile taught Israel that text can be a portable temple. Write it, carry it, and you can be at home with God even on foreign soil. After return, the library continued to grow. Histories were updated. Chronicles retold the past with a new emphasis on worship and temple service. Wisdom books, Job, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes asked how to live well in a world where justice sometimes hides. Psalms formed a songbook used at home, on the road, and in the sanctuary. Writings, the third section of the Hebrew Bible, gathered this diverse literature and likely reached a more stable form by the first centuries of the Common Era. Meanwhile, Jews living outside Judea needed scripture in their new language. In Alexandria, a Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures took shape between the 3rd and 1st centuries BCE. We call it the Septuagint. It included translations of the law, prophets, writings, and also books composed in Greek, like Wisdom of Solomon and 2 Maccabees. Greek-speaking Jews read and prayed these texts. The first Christians, almost all bilingual or multilingual, did as well. When the New Testament quotes the Old, it often uses the Greek wording from the Septuagint rather than the exact Hebrew phrasing. That simple detail reveals how translation was part of the Bible's life from the start. Then came a discovery that changed modern understanding: the Dead Sea Scrolls. In the mid-20th century, shepherds and scholars uncovered hundreds of ancient manuscripts in caves near Qumran by the Dead Sea. These scrolls date from about 250 BCE to 70 CE. They include almost every book of the Hebrew Bible and reveal that slightly different textual traditions circulated at the same time. Some match the later standardized Hebrew text used in most modern Old Testaments. Others align more closely with the Septuagint's Hebrew source. The find confirmed that the Bible's words lived in families of manuscripts, not a single frozen form, before and during the time of Jesus. Act 2. Escalation. Shift now to the 1st century and the birth of the New Testament. The earliest Christian texts were letters. Paul's letters to communities in Thessalonica, Corinth, Galatia, and Rome were written in the 50s CE, about 20 years after Jesus' death and within the lifetime of many eyewitnesses. Sometimes Paul dictated to a secretary, an amanuensis, who shaped sentences and then added Paul's signature line at the end to confirm authorship. These letters addressed real problems: arguments over food laws, divisions over teachers, questions about resurrection hope, and how to live under empire without letting empire rule the heart. As churches copied and traded these letters, they became a network. A community in Ephesus would treasure its own copy, borrow a letter from Corinth, and share both onward. Lists began to form of the letters to be read. Peter's letters and others joined the circle. The voice of the church learning to be the church is the sound you hear in the New Testament. Epistles, a conversation across cities and generations. The Gospels came next. Mark likely wrote first, around the late 60s or early 70s CE, blending sources into a quick, urgent narrative. Matthew and Luke drew on Mark and other material, shaping teachings into long blocks and parables into ordered sets. Luke opens with a historian's introduction. Many have attempted to write accounts. He has investigated and now writes an orderly one. John, later and different, speaks with theological depth and a poet's memory, layering symbol and echo. These books were not just written. They were edited, arranged, and read aloud in gatherings. A deacon or teacher stood and spoke the lines while others listened. That's why you find features designed for ears. Repetition, memorable phrases, and structures that mirror themselves like staircases. The words were performance and parchment at once. Copying never stopped. Papyrus sheets wore out, so communities made fresh copies. Early Christians adopted the codex, what we think of as a book faster than the wider culture. Codices let readers find passages quickly, carry more text in a single volume, and flip between places. The move from scroll to codex helped shape the New Testament into collections that could sit together: the four Gospels, Acts, and general epistles, the Pauline letters, Revelation. What about the canon, the official list of books? For the Hebrew Bible, canon formation was gradual. By the 2nd century CE, most Jewish communities agreed on the law and the prophets. The writings took longer to stabilize. A popular theory once claimed a council at Jamnia locked the Hebrew canon, but most scholars today say it was a process among teachers, not a single meeting with a final vote. Criteria included language, Hebrew or Aramaic, age, use in worship, and perceived spiritual authority. For Christians, the process came in waves. Some leaders tried to narrow the list too much. Marcion, in the 2nd century, rejected the Old Testament and trimmed the New to a short list. Others, like Irenaeus, defended the fourfold gospel and the goodness of the Hebrew Scriptures. A late 2nd century document known as the Muratorian Fragment lists most New Testament books. By the 4th century, Eusebius described books widely accepted, disputed, and rejected. In 367, Athanasius sent an Easter letter naming the 27 New Testament books modern Christians know, and regional councils in North Africa soon echoed him. The point is not that one council created a Bible overnight, but that centuries of reading, copying, preaching, and prayer built a practical consensus that teachers then wrote down. If the canon shows which books, textual transmission shows which words. We do not have the original autographs, the first copy of Genesis, Mark, or Romans. We have thousands of later manuscripts in Greek, Hebrew, Aramaic, Latin, Syriac, Coptic, and more. They do not match perfectly. Scribes made mistakes. They skipped a line that ended like the next, doubled a phrase, or fixed a hard reading they thought was wrong. Some wrote notes in margins that later copyists accidentally slid into the main text. This sounds scary, but it is actually a strength. With so many manuscripts from so many places, scholars can compare versions and work back toward the earliest recoverable text. This work is called textual criticism, and it's more like careful detective work than criticism in the modern sense. Experts weigh older manuscripts, quality of families, and which reading best explains how the others arose. A harder reading that a scribe might have tempered is often preferred as original over a smoother line that sounds improved. Key witnesses help anchor the work. For the New Testament, fragments like a small scrap of John, known as P52, push our evidence into the early 2nd century. Full codices like Sinaiticus and Vaticanus from the 4th century preserve almost the whole Bible in Greek. For the Old Testament, the Masoretic text, standardized by Jewish scholars between the 6th and 10th centuries CE, kept consonants inherited from antiquity and added vowel points, accents, and notes in the margins to guide faithful copying and chanting. When the Dead Sea Scrolls turned up, their readings often aligned with the Masoretic tradition, and sometimes with alternate Hebrew forms behind the Septuagint, confirming that a living textual ecosystem existed before standardization. Translation is part of how the Bible was written, because translation rewrites a text into a new tone, while aiming to keep the original meaning alive. The Septuagint did this for Greek readers long before Christianity. Jerome's Vulgate made a fresh Latin translation in the 4th century, checking Hebrew where possible. Syriac Christians treasured the Peshitta. Coptic believers in Egypt had their own versions. In English, waves of translations followed. Wycliffe, Tyndale, King James, and modern versions that draw on today's critical editions of Hebrew and Greek. Across this history, the Bible's how keeps a steady theme. Communities read together, they copied together, they tested, debated, and received together. The library we have today reflects both faith and craft, prayers shaped by poetry, law shaped by story, and story shaped by memory hardened into ink. Act 3. climax, and aftermath. Here's the part that can feel like a plot twist. The Bible's survival depended on small habits repeated well. Counting letters, passing on tunes, writing in the spaces between exile and harvest. Scribes sometimes signed their work in tiny notes. "My hand is tired," writes one monk in a medieval copy. Another begs the reader to correct mistakes and not blame the scribe too harshly. And yet, in all this ordinary effort, something extraordinary happened. A multilingual chorus learned to carry texts through fire, conquest, migration, and technology shifts without losing their center. Walk for a moment through a timeline. In an Iron Age village, his shepherd hears a story of Abraham and repeats it to his sons under a clean sky. In a royal court, a scribe writes a law code and numbers the lines so they can be checked. In exile, a priest writes a careful account of the tabernacle, so a people without a temple can still imagine worship. In an Alexandrian study, translators debate whether a rare Hebrew word means well or cistern and choose a Greek term that will guide millions. On a dusty road, a messenger carries a rolled letter from Paul. It will be unfolded, read aloud, and copied for the next town. A century later, a bishop argues that yes, we read 4 Gospels, not 1 and not 20. In a monastery, a team of scribes copies all of Scripture into a codex that weighs as much as a small child. In a cave, a jar keeps a scroll dry for 2,000 years, so that a boy's throw will ring against clay and open a new chapter in modern research. Through all of that, the Bible stayed public. It was read out loud in assemblies. It was sung. It was argued over at long tables and short ones. Canon was not a secret room with a vote. It was a well-worn path formed by feet, going the same way for a long time. By the time councils gave lists, congregations across continents had already treated those books as their shared map for generations. The aftermath is our present. Modern Bible editions list textual notes at the bottom of the page. Other ancient authorities read, "That line is not a threat, it's a gift." It shows your edition is honest about the living history behind the words. Scholars continue to compare new finds, digitize manuscripts, and refine critical editions like the Biblia Hebraica and the Nestle-Aland Novum Testamentum. Translators weigh word choices so that an ancient psalm can make sense to a teenager in Seattle and a grandmother in Nairobi. If you hold a Bible today, you hold a library composed across about 1,000 years, preserved across 2 more, and translated into more languages than any book in history. The how is patience, community, and the stubborn belief that words matter enough to save. Twist insight. The secret hiding in plain sight is this: the Bible is a heard book as much as a written one. It was crafted for the ear, to be spoken in rooms and courtyards. That is why Hebrew poetry repeats itself, and the Gospels carry stories in sets of 3s. That is why letters close with greetings you can picture co-workers sending love from across the room, and why some lines feel like creeds or hymns. The Bible was written by many hands, but it was completed by communities who listened. The greatest editor might be the crowd that gathered week after week, nodding when a line rang true and leaning forward when a new phrase caught light. Reflection, takeaway. We often ask who wrote the Bible. A better question might be how a people wrote a home for their faith. The path runs from oral tales to scrolls, from exile to return, from Greek translation to Latin to modern tongues. Scribes counted letters and saved vowels. Teachers chose which books fed life. Copyists made errors, and the great family of manuscripts let later readers find their way back. Archaeology gave us scrolls that made our text better. Scholarship and devotion worked together more often than they worked apart. If you carry one takeaway, let it be this: the Bible you can read today is the product of care. Even when empires shifted and languages turned, people showed up to copy, to sing, to translate, and to share. They believed words could hold hope. and they behaved as if that hope was worth the work. What surprised you most? The role of the Septuagint, the Dead Sea Scrolls, or how letters became scripture? Tell me in the comments, and share your favorite translation and why it speaks to you. If you want more clear, respectful deep dives into history, language, and faith, subscribe now and hit the bell. New episodes each week explore how ancient texts shape the world we live in.